I had always loved hiking alone. There was something peaceful about being out in the wilderness with no one else around, just the sound of the wind through the trees, the crunch of dirt and leaves beneath my boots, and the occasional rustling of small animals darting through the underbrush. It was my escape from the noise of everyday life, a chance to clear my mind and push my body to its limits. So when I planned a solo trip into the Smoky Mountains, I was more excited than nervous. The trail I had chosen was a lesser-known route, stretching deep into the dense forest, winding through hills and valleys, far away from any roads or towns. It wasn't a popular tourist spot, which meant I could enjoy the solitude I craved. I packed light, just enough food for 2 nights, a tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a knife, and a small first aid kit. My phone had no signal this deep in the mountains, but I didn't mind. I had my map and compass, and I had done enough hikes like this to feel confident in my navigation skills. That first day was perfect. The air was cool, the sky was clear, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and insects. I moved at a steady pace, stopping occasionally to drink water and enjoy the scenery. I didn't see another soul the entire day. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing near a stream, the perfect spot to set up camp. I pitched my tent, gathered some firewood, and sat down to eat. The only sound was the trickle of water and the distant hoot of an owl. As the sun set, I felt completely at ease. But that was about to change. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. I woke up early, just as the sun was rising. The air was cold, and the forest was still wrapped in a thin layer of mist. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, stretching my stiff muscles. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They were fresh, pressed into the soft earth just outside my tent. Large, booted prints. My stomach twisted. I had been alone all day yesterday. I hadn't seen a single person. No one else should be here. I crouched down, examining them. The prints weren't mine, they were too large. And they weren't there the night before. That meant someone had been near my tent while I was sleeping. I swallowed hard, scanning the forest around me. The trees stood tall and unmoving, the undergrowth thick and shadowy. I saw no movement, no sign of anyone. But the prints were fresh. Someone had been here, and they hadn't made their presence known. I told myself it had to be a lost hiker who had stumbled upon my camp and moved on. Maybe they didn't want to wake me. That had to be it. Still, unease settled in my gut as I packed up my gear and got back on the trail. As I hiked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. At first, it was just an eerie sensation, like an itch at the back of my mind. The kind of feeling that makes you glance over your shoulder for no reason. But then, little things started happening. A faint rustling in the bushes that stopped the moment I turned to look. The sound of twigs snapping in the distance, just out of sight. I picked up my pace, pushing forward, but the feeling only grew stronger. Then, about an hour into my hike, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Another set of fresh footprints. These ones were ahead of me on the trail, leading the same direction I was going. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering. I hadn't passed anyone. There were no cross trails, no other ways someone could have gotten ahead of me without me seeing them. Which meant one thing. Whoever had been near my tent had circled around and was now ahead of me. I swallowed my fear and kept moving, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But now every step felt heavy. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was hiding something. By midday, I had reached a narrow stretch of the trail where the trees grew closer together, blocking out much of the sunlight. It was darker, quieter, the kind of place that made your instincts scream at you to turn around. That's when I heard it. A whistle. Short, sharp, and too close. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It had come from the trees to my left, deep in the forest. I turned slowly, scanning the undergrowth. Nothing. just tangled branches and fallen logs. Then, another whistle, this time from behind me. I spun around, my pulse hammering. Still no one. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being toyed with. I wasn't just being followed. Someone was letting me know they were there. I didn't hesitate. I started walking faster, almost jogging, my hand gripping the knife on my belt. I needed to find a place to set up camp before dark. I walked until my legs burned, until the sun began to sink behind the hills, casting long shadows across the trail. I found another small clearing, not far from a rocky outcrop. It wasn't the best campsite, but I didn't care. I just wanted the night to be over. I built a small fire and forced myself to eat, my ears straining for any sound. The whistling had stopped, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. As darkness fell, the trees seemed to press in closer. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch. I gripped my knife tight, my heart racing. Then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, standing just inside the tree line, motionless, watching me. My breath caught. It was too dark to see details, but I could make out the shape of a man. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My mind screamed at me to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. Then he stepped back. Not quickly, not startled, just a slow, deliberate step deeper into the darkness. Then another. Then he was gone. I barely slept that night. Every noise sent my heart pounding against my ribs. But nothing else happened. No footsteps, no whistling, just silence. At first light, I broke camp and practically ran down the trail. I didn't stop to eat, didn't stop for water. I just moved. When I finally reached my car at the trailhead, I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking. As I started the engine and looked back at the tree line, my stomach turned to ice. He was there, standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. I slammed the car into reverse and tore out of the parking lot. I didn't stop until I was miles away, safe in civilization. I never reported it, never told anyone the full story. I just knew one thing for certain. Whoever he was, he wanted me to know he was there. I never thought a camping trip would be the thing to shake my understanding of reality. I've been hiking and camping for years, long, difficult treks, off-trail excursions, solo trips in remote areas. I've encountered all kinds of things in the wilderness. Bears, sudden storms, broken gear miles from civilization. But what happened on that trip in Utah still makes my stomach turn every time I think about it. It started as a simple 2-night hiking trip with my friend, Derek. We had planned to go deep into the backcountry, far from the usual tourist trails. We wanted solitude, quiet, and the feeling of being truly out there, disconnected from the world. The hike started like any other. We parked at a small, barely used trailhead, packed up our gear, and started walking. The sun was high, the sky a perfect stretch of blue, and the air smelled like pine and dry earth. The landscape was rugged red rock formations, dense patches of forest, and long stretches of empty land. It was exactly what we were looking for. We covered about 12 miles before settling on a campsite. It was perfect. A small clearing surrounded by thick trees, close to a slow-moving creek, and completely undisturbed. No trash, no fire pits, no signs of other hikers. Just untouched wilderness. We set up camp as the sun started to dip behind the hills. The tent went up, the fire was built, and we sat back, stretching sore muscles and watching the sky turn orange and pink. Everything felt normal. We talked for a while, eating trail mix and jerky, going over our plan for the next day. We'd hike another 5 miles, explore a canyon we'd read about, then loop back to camp for another night. The fire crackled, sending occasional sparks into the night. The air cooled quickly. The sounds of the forest surrounded us. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of small animals in the brush. Then, around 2 a.m., I woke up. It wasn't sudden. I didn't bolt upright or wake up to a noise. I just drifted awake. My eyes opened, and I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent, unsure what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I noticed it. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. No wind.
No insects.
No rustling leaves. Just a void of sound, like the world outside the tent had ceased to exist. A feeling of unease crept over me. My body tensed, my breathing slowed, my ears strained for any sound. Nothing. I reached over and nudged Derek. He groaned, half asleep. "Listen," I whispered. He lay still for a moment. Then I heard his breathing change. Shallow, careful. He noticed it too. "That's weird," he muttered. Neither of us moved. Minutes passed. Then, just as suddenly as it had gone, the night sounds returned. A single cricket chirped. Then another. A breeze moved through the trees. The normal sounds of the forest resumed, as if nothing had happened. Eventually, we went back to sleep. The next morning, I barely remembered the silence from the night before. We packed our gear, had a quick breakfast, and set off for the canyon. The hike was tough, steep inclines, loose rock, and barely any trail to follow. But the views were incredible. Red cliffs stretched high above us, carved by time and wind. We spent hours exploring, taking photos and climbing over boulders. It was a good day, but when we returned to camp, something felt off. At first, I couldn't place it. Everything was where we had left it. The fire pit, the tent, our backpacks. Nothing had been touched. But something in the air felt wrong, like stepping into a room you know has been rearranged, even if you can't tell how. Derek felt it too. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the trees. "Does this place look different?" he asked. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It just feels weird." We walked around, checking our gear, looking for any signs that something had been disturbed. Nothing, but the feeling of wrongness wouldn't leave. That night, we sat by the fire again, quieter this time. The woods felt darker. The wind seemed to move through the trees in a way that made the branches whisper. By 11 p.m., we turned in. Neither of us mentioned the silence from the night before. I woke up to Derek shaking me, hard. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something I had never seen before, fear. "Where's the tent?" he whispered. I blinked, groggy, trying to make sense of his words. Then I sat up. We were lying in our sleeping bags on the ground, under the open sky. The tent was gone. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. My head swung around, scanning the clearing. Everything was gone. Our backpacks, our gear, our food gone. The fire pit was gone. Even the disturbed dirt where we had pitched the tent looked untouched. It was as if we had never been there. Derek was breathing hard, eyes darting around the clearing. "What the hell is happening?" I turned in circles, searching for anything. Tracks, drag marks. Any sign that our stuff had been taken. Nothing. I ran to the edge of the clearing and looked into the trees, half expecting to see our tent tangled in branches, our gear scattered through the underbrush. But there was nothing but darkness. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The trees looked different. They were thicker, closer together. The clearing itself seemed smaller. Panic set in. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. "We have to go," Derek said. His voice was shaking. We grabbed our flashlights and started walking. Neither of us spoke. We just moved. The trail back was unfamiliar. The landscape didn't match what we had walked through the past 2 days. Rocks we had climbed over before were gone. The gentle slope we had descended was now steeper. The creek we had camped near was missing. It was like the land had changed around us. We walked for hours. No talking, just the sound of our footsteps and our breathing. Every now and then, I checked behind us, half expecting to see something. Someone. We finally found a familiar landmark, a large rock formation we had passed on our way in. Relief flooded me. "We're almost there," I whispered. It took another hour to reach the trailhead. Our car was there, exactly as we had left it. But the moment I saw it, a deep sense of dread settled in my gut. Something didn't feel right. We got in and drove, neither of us speaking. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, nearly 40 miles away. The next day, we reported the incident to a park ranger. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When we finished, he asked us to show him the campsite on a map. We pointed to where we had camped. The ranger frowned. "There aren't any clearings in that area," he said. I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "It's all thick forest," he continued. "No flat ground, no water sources. People don't camp there." Derek and I stared at each other. The ranger must have seen our expressions. He sighed, rubbing his chin. Then he said something that still haunts me to this day. "You're not the first ones to say something like this." The mountains of Colorado have always been my escape. I love their isolation, the way the trees swallow sound, the crisp air that makes everything feel cleaner, fresher. I had hiked alone countless times before, camping deep in the wilderness with nothing but my tent, a fire, and the stars. That weekend was no different. I picked a remote trail leading up into the Rockies, one that wasn't too popular but still well documented on maps. It was late September, and the weather was cool but not freezing. The perfect time for a quiet solo trip. I started hiking early in the morning, my pack weighing heavily on my shoulders. The trail wound through thick forest, the scent of pine heavy in the air. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned, revealing breathtaking views of the valleys below. The solitude was perfect. By late afternoon, I reached my planned campsite, a flat clearing just off the trail, nestled between a few towering pines. A small stream trickled nearby, the perfect water source. I set up my tent, started a fire, and cooked a simple meal as the sun dipped below the horizon. The wind had started to pick up. Nothing unusual. Mountain winds were common, especially as the temperature dropped for the night. The sound of it moving through the trees was almost soothing. I finished my food, stretched, and crawled into my tent, zipping myself inside my sleeping bag. The fire outside flickered, casting long shadows on the tent walls. I listened to the wind for a while, feeling it press against the fabric, making it ripple. Then, slowly, I drifted to sleep. I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. Everything was quiet except for the wind, still moving steadily through the trees. I turned onto my side, adjusting my sleeping bag, ready to go back to sleep. Then I heard it, a long, drawn-out sound, a scream, carried on the wind, distant yet clear. It wasn't an animal sound. I knew the cries of coyotes, the hoots of owls, the eerie wail of elk bugling in the distance. This was human. I sat up quickly, heart pounding. Came again, higher this time, closer. I unzipped my tent slowly, peering outside. The fire had burned down to embers, barely casting any light. The trees swayed, their branches groaning against the wind. Nothing moved. I swallowed hard. It had to be another hiker, someone lost calling for help. It was rare to run into people out here, but not impossible. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my breath visible in the cold air. "Hello," I called, my voice barely louder than the wind. Silence. I waited, my pulse hammered in my ears. Then the scream again. This time it was unmistakably closer. A deep, primal fear settled into my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to get back inside my tent, to zip it up, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't ignore it. I turned in slow circles, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. The wind made the branches dance, shadows shifting unnaturally against the ground. Then I heard something else. Whispers, low, broken words, carried on the wind. I strained to listen, my breath frozen in my throat. It almost sounded like my name. I stepped back toward my tent, my grip tightening on my flashlight. Then the scream came again, and this time it wasn't in the distance. It was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hands. The trees stood still. Nothing was there, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like something unseen was pressing against my chest. My skin crawled, my instincts screaming louder than ever. I took a slow step backward, my mind racing. Was it the wind distorting a natural sound? My imagination playing tricks? Or was someone out here with me? I didn't wait to find out. I dove into my tent, yanking the zipper up in one frantic motion. My hands trembled as I reached for the knife I always kept in my pack. I sat there, curled in the sleeping bag, gripping the knife so tightly my fingers ached. The wind howled outside, stronger now, shaking the tent walls. But beneath the wind, I swore I could still hear it. The whispers, the name that sounded like mine. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the thin fabric walls of my tent. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. At some point, exhaustion overtook me. I must have drifted into a fitful sleep because I woke up to daylight filtering through the tent fabric. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought I had imagined the entire thing. Then I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Footprints. They circled my tent, pressed deep into the dirt. Bare footprints. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks. Bare human feet. The breath rushed out of my lungs. The prints were erratic, like whoever made them had been pacing, stopping, turning. Right outside my tent. My skin turned ice cold. I forced myself to look around. The forest was still. The wind had died down. Everything looked exactly as I had left it the night before, except for the footprints. I grabbed my gear in record time, shoving everything into my pack with shaking hands. I didn't care about breakfast, didn't care about properly securing my campsite. I just needed to get out. I practically ran back down the trail, my head snapping around at every sound. Every rustling branch, every shift of the wind sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. Took me hours to get back to my car. When I finally reached it, I threw my pack inside, locked the doors, and sat there, trying to steady my breathing. I looked back toward the trailhead one last time, and for just a second, I swore I saw movement in the trees. A shadow, still, watching. I didn't stay to find out. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back. I never hiked that trail again. Hiking has always been my escape. When life gets too loud, when the weight of the world presses down on my chest, I retreat to the quiet wilderness where nothing matters except the next step forward. I had planned this particular trip for weeks, a solo hike through a remote stretch of the Montana backcountry. The trail was seldom traveled, exactly how I liked it. I packed light, just the essentials, and brought my dog, Scout, a German Shepherd mix with sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty. The forecast was perfect. Crisp autumn air, a clear sky, and the kind of cool breeze that carries the scent of pine and damp earth. I set out early, eager to put as many miles behind me as possible before making camp. The sun filtered through the trees, golden and warm, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. I was utterly alone, or at least I thought I was. About an hour into the hike, Scout's ears perked up. He stopped abruptly, his entire body tensing, and stared into the dense forest to our right. I followed his gaze, my stomach tightening. A man stood there, not on the trail but several yards into the thick underbrush. He was partially hidden by the trees, his clothes dark and ragged. He wasn't moving, just watching. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe he was another hiker who had wandered off the trail, but something about him made my skin crawl. His posture was wrong, too stiff, too unnatural. I hesitated before calling out, "Hey, you okay?" No response. The man didn't even flinch. He just stood there. Scout let out a low, uneasy growl, the fur along his back bristling. That was enough for me. I wasn't about to stick around. Keeping a firm grip on Scout's leash, I picked up the pace, moving quickly along the trail. I didn't look back. 5 minutes passed. 10. I was starting to convince myself that it had been nothing. A trick of the light, my imagination running wild. Maybe he really had just been another hiker, minding his own business. Then I glanced over my shoulder. He was closer. Panic jolted through me like an electric current. He was still off trail, still partially obscured by the trees, but there was no mistaking it. He had moved, and he was following me. I turned forward and walked faster. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breathing quick and uneven. Scout stayed tense, his ears twitching, sensing my fear. After another few minutes, I risked another glance. Gone. I exhaled sharply, a strange mix of relief and dread washing over me. He wasn't there anymore. Maybe he had changed direction, wandered deeper into the woods? Maybe I had imagined the whole thing? I forced myself to keep moving. The further I got from that spot, the better. But then, ahead of me, just beyond the next bend, stood the same man. I stopped so suddenly that Scout nearly pulled out of my grip. My blood turned to ice. There was no way. I had left him behind. I had watched him disappear. There was no way he could be in front of me. Yet there he was, standing just off the trail, half hidden behind a tree, his face still obscured. Waiting, watching. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not a careful jog, not a controlled retreat. I bolted. Scout ran beside me, his muscles tense, his breaths quick. My backpack bounced against my shoulders, branches whipping against my arms as I pushed myself forward. My only thought was getting away. I ran for what felt like miles, lungs burning, legs aching. Only when I was sure I had put enough distance between us did I finally slow down, chest heaving. I listened. The forest was silent, save for the wind rustling through the leaves. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing. No man. No movement. No sound. I had lost him. Relief flooded through me, though it did little to calm the tremors in my hands. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and forced a shaky breath. I needed to think. I needed to get out of here. The problem was, I was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest road. The only way back was the same trail I had come in on. I couldn't risk doubling back. I checked my map, my fingers unsteady. There was an alternate route, a longer, more difficult path that eventually looped back to the main trailhead. It would take longer, but at least I wouldn't have to go back the way I came. Decision made, I adjusted my pack and pressed forward. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, the shadows growing longer. I needed to find a place to set up camp soon. The thought of spending the night out here with that thing lurking somewhere nearby made my stomach twist, but I had no choice. After another hour, I found a decent clearing. Flat ground, a few sturdy trees for cover, and just enough space to build a fire. I set up camp quickly, my nerves on edge. Scout stayed close, his ears twitching at every sound. I started a fire, hoping it would make me feel safer. Didn't. As darkness swallowed the forest, every snap of a twig, every whisper of the wind sent a jolt through my system. My grip tightened around the knife I had pulled from my pack. Scout remained on high alert, his eyes locked on the tree line. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I had escaped whatever had been following me, a branch snapped, closed. My breath hitched. I gripped Scout's collar, my pulse thundering in my ears. The fire flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. Then I saw him, standing just at the edge of the firelight, barely visible between the trees. Still, silent, watching, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, to do something, but my body refused to obey. Then, in the flickering glow of the fire, I finally saw his face. It was mine, a perfect, hollow-eyed reflection of myself. And then, he smiled. I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment I was frozen. The next I was grabbing my pack and tearing through the woods. Scout bolted beside me, his low growls rumbling through the darkness. Branches lashed against my skin. Roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the dirt, gasping for air. The forest around me was still, the only sound my ragged breathing. The man, or whatever he was gone. But something in me knew he wasn't really gone. I never stopped running after that. I abandoned my gear, my tent, everything except my flashlight and my knife. I hiked through the night, not daring to stop. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was rising. I stumbled to my car, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. I didn't look back. I never went back. And sometimes, late at night, when I find myself alone in the dark, I swear I can feel someone watching. It started as an ordinary solo hike. I had planned a week-long trip in Yosemite National Park, following a route that wound through some of the more isolated parts of the wilderness. I had done solo hikes before, but something about this trip felt different. Maybe it was the sheer remoteness. Miles and miles of untouched forest, towering cliffs, and the knowledge that out here, I was completely alone. Or so I thought. I was about 3 days in when I stopped at a rest area along the trail. It was a small clearing with a fallen log, perfect for sitting and refilling my water from a nearby stream. I pulled out a granola bar and sat down to eat, enjoying the quiet. Then, I noticed movement in the trees. A man, tall, lean, wearing a faded blue hiking jacket and cargo pants, stepped onto the trail. He had a large pack on his back and moved like he had been hiking for days. His face was weathered, a little sunburnt, but friendly. "Hey there," he called out, giving me a small wave. "Hey," I replied. He walked over and set his pack down beside the log, stretching his arms. "Been out here long?" "3 days," I said, heading toward Glen Allen. "Nice," he said. "I just came from there. Beautiful spot." I asked him how the trail was ahead, and he gave me a rundown of what to expect. Rocky terrain, a few water crossings, and a great viewpoint a couple of miles up. He seemed completely normal, just another hiker enjoying the wilderness. After a few minutes, he finished his snack, hoisted his pack, and gave me a nod. "Well, see you up the trail, maybe." And with that, he walked off. It was such a small, casual interaction that I barely thought about it at the time. But later, I would replay it over and over, analyzing every second, because nothing about it made sense. I took my time packing up and continued on my way. The air was crisp, the sun filtering through the pines, casting long shadows on the trail. My boots crunched against the dirt as I moved steadily uphill. About an hour later, I reached the viewpoint the man had mentioned, a wide, rocky ledge overlooking a vast valley. I took a break, pulled out my phone to snap a few pictures, and then something caught my eye. Down in the valley, way off trail, a figure was moving. It was far away, but I could see him clearly enough. A lone hiker, heading down a steep, rocky incline that led deep into the forest. His movements were strange, unsteady, almost stumbling. He wasn't following any trail. He was just moving downhill. I squinted, trying to make out more details, and then a chill ran down my spine. It was the same man I had just spoken to. His blue jacket stood out against the green backdrop of trees, and even from this distance, I could tell something was off. He wasn't walking like someone who knew where they were going. He was wandering, almost like he was in a daze. I hesitated. Should I call out? Try to get his attention? Maybe he had dropped something and was looking for it, or maybe he had gotten turned around. But something about the way he moved sent alarm bells through my head. I watched him disappear into the tree line below. Something about it did not feel right. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. As I continued hiking, my mind kept drifting back to the man. Why had he gone down there? That part of the forest was nowhere near the main route. There were no trails, no landmarks, just miles of dense wilderness. By the time I reached my campsite for the night, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting deep shadows across the landscape. I set up my tent, boiled some water for dinner, and sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of the forest. It should have been peaceful, but I felt uneasy. I kept expecting to hear footsteps approaching my camp, or to see movement in the trees. But nothing came. Eventually, I crawled into my sleeping bag and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I made my way to the nearest ranger station. It was a small wooden outpost, staffed by 2 rangers who looked like they had been working there for years. One of them, a middle-aged man with a sun-weathered face, glanced up as I walked in. "Something we can help you with?" I hesitated for a second, then told them about the hiker I had seen, how I had talked to him at the rest area, then later saw him wandering deep into the valley. I expected them to maybe shrug it off or say they'd keep an eye out. But the moment I described him, the blue jacket, the cargo pants, the lean build, both rangers stiffened. The older one exchanged a look with his partner, then turned back to me. "You said you talked to this guy? Face to face?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" The ranger ran a hand over his face and let out a long breath. "That man's been missing for over a week." I stared at him. "What?" "He set out alone, supposed to check in with friends last Tuesday. Never did. Search teams went looking but found nothing. No sign of him, no gear, no tracks. It's like he vanished." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "But I just saw him yesterday." The younger ranger leaned forward. "You're sure it was him?" "Yes," I said. "I talked to him. He seemed fine. Tired, but fine." The older ranger frowned. "And then you saw him going down into the valley?" I nodded. "Yeah, he was moving weird, though, like he was out of it." The room was silent for a moment. Then the older ranger stood up. "We need to report this. If he's still alive, we need to get a search team down there immediately." They sent out a team that afternoon. I stayed behind, waiting for updates, my stomach twisted in knots. If I had been a little braver, maybe I would have called out when I saw him in the valley. Maybe I could have stopped him. The rangers returned the next day. They found nothing. No footprints, no gear, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But 3 days later, they found his body, miles away in the opposite direction of where I had seen him. He was lying in a shallow creek bed, partially covered by leaves and debris. He had been dead for days. The official report said he likely fell and succumbed to exposure. But I knew what I had seen. I had spoken to him, face to face. He had been alive. So how was he dead, miles away, before I ever saw him? I still don't have an answer, and I don't think I ever will. I was never the type to believe in anything beyond what I could see, touch, or hear with my own ears. I've always been a logical person, someone who dismisses the supernatural as fear feeding on itself. But there are some things that happen out in the wilderness that no amount of logic can explain away. This is one of those things. It happened 5 years ago when my brother, Caleb, and I went hiking in Alaska. We had planned a week-long trip through the backcountry, loaded with supplies, maps, and an emergency GPS. It wasn't our first time hiking in isolated terrain, but it was the first time we had gone this deep, this far away from anything resembling civilization. The first 3 days were perfect. Crisp, clean air filled our lungs, and the vast wilderness of Alaska stretched endlessly in every direction. No roads, no cars, just towering trees, rolling hills, and an occasional glimpse of snow-capped mountains in the distance. The further we hiked, the more it felt like we were stepping into a world untouched by time. On the 4th day, everything changed. We had been following a well-marked trail through a dense section of forest when we came across something strange, an unmarked path leading off to the right. It was a narrow, winding trail that looked well-traveled, as if plenty of people had walked it before. The trees on either side were packed close together, their branches twisting overhead to form a sort of natural tunnel. Shouldn't have been there. Our map didn't show any branching trails in this area. Caleb, always the curious one, stopped and pointed. "Look at that. Ever seen anything like it?" I shook my head. "It's not on the map." "Maybe it's an old game trail," he suggested. "Or maybe it's just not marked." That should have been the first red flag. Official trails are always marked. The fact that this one wasn't should have been enough for us to move on. But there was something about it, something almost inviting. We decided to follow it. The moment we stepped onto the new trail, something felt different. It's hard to describe. The air felt heavier, the temperature seemed to drop slightly, and most of all, it was quiet. Not the kind of quiet you experience in nature, with birds chirping and leaves rustling in the wind. This was absolute silence.
No birds. No insects.
No distant sound of running water. Just the sound of our own footsteps crunching against the dirt. Caleb noticed it too. "It's too quiet," he muttered. I nodded. "Maybe a storm's coming." That was the only logical explanation I could think of. Animals tend to go silent before bad weather. But there were no clouds. The trees grew denser as we walked. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the trail felt. The path was too well formed, like it had been deliberately maintained. Yet there were no trail markers, no signs of human activity, no footprints but our own. After about 20 minutes, we stopped to rest. Caleb pulled out a water bottle and took a long sip, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is weird, right?" he said. "Like, really weird." I nodded again, reluctant to admit how uneasy I felt. "Maybe we should turn back." Caleb was about to respond when we heard it. The whispering. First, it was so faint I thought I imagined it. A distant murmur, like wind moving through the trees. But there was no wind. The sound didn't come from any particular direction. It just surrounded us. Then the whispering grew louder. It wasn't random noise. It was voices, low, hushed, and fast, like dozens of people whispering at once. Too many voices to count. I turned to Caleb, my heart hammering. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "You hear that, right?" he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Yeah." We stood there, frozen, listening. The voices didn't sound threatening, at least not at first. But the more I listened, the more I realized something terrifying. They were saying our names. I don't know how long we stood there, staring into the trees, but when the whispering changed, I knew we had made a mistake. The voices were no longer just saying our names. They were repeating our last words. Caleb had whispered, "You hear that, right?" And now, somewhere in the trees, something was whispering it back in a perfect mimic of his voice. I had said, "Yeah," And a second later, the exact same word came back to us. Not an echo. It wasn't delayed. It wasn't distorted. It was instantaneous. My blood turned to ice. "We're leaving," I said, my voice shaking. Caleb didn't argue. We turned around and started walking fast, nearly jogging back the way we had come. But after only a minute, Caleb grabbed my arm, stopping me in my tracks. He was staring at the ground, at the trail, and I felt my stomach drop. Our footprints were gone. There should have been 2 sets of footprints in the dirt, leading back the way we had come. But the ground was completely undisturbed. No prints, no marks, nothing, as if we had never walked that way. Caleb started breathing fast, his panic barely contained. "This isn't possible. We came this way. We should see them." I felt dizzy, lightheaded. My thoughts raced for an explanation, but there was none. The whispering did not stop. It followed us, shifting positions, surrounding us from all sides. But the voices never overlapped each other. Every whisper was perfectly timed, perfectly spaced. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. We kept walking, trying to find the main trail, but the deeper we went, the more the trees started to look the same. The path, once clear, now felt endless, like we were walking in circles. And then, ahead of us, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were 2 people standing in the path. They were far ahead, their features obscured by the shadows of the trees. But I knew one thing instantly. They weren't strangers. They were us. 2 figures standing perfectly still. Same height, same build. The one on the left had Caleb's stance, the slight hunch of his shoulders. The one on the right stood just like I did, weight shifted to one leg. My breath caught in my throat. The figures just stood there. Caleb grabbed my arm. "Run." We didn't look back. I don't know how long we ran. Time lost meaning. The whispering never faded, but the further we sprinted, the more it seemed to weaken. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We burst out of the trees and stumbled onto the main trail. Bright sunlight, normal sounds, the distant rush of a river. We looked back. The path we had followed was gone. Only dense trees remained. No sign of a trail. No sign of anything. We never spoke about it again. We never went back. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up to a sound outside my window, a whisper, and it says my name. I had planned this trip for weeks. A solo 2-night backpacking trip deep in the Appalachian wilderness. The idea was simple. Disconnect from everything, clear my head, and just exist in the vast, quiet expanse of nature. I had hiked in these mountains before, though never this far in. The trail was rugged but well-traveled, winding through dense forests of oak and pine, past rocky outcrops, and over rolling ridges. I started early in the morning, eager to cover as much distance as possible before setting up camp. The first 10 miles passed uneventfully. I saw no other hikers after the first hour, just endless trees stretching in every direction. Birds chirped high in the canopy, and the rustling of leaves filled the silence. I welcomed the solitude. By late afternoon, I reached the small, secluded lake I had marked on my map. It was perfect. Crystal clear water, a flat clearing nearby for my tent, and no signs of recent activity. I dropped my pack, stretched, and went about setting up camp. Tent pitched? Check. Firewood gathered? Check. Food stowed properly? Check. As the sun dipped below the trees, I sat by my small fire, eating a simple meal of dehydrated pasta. The silence was absolute. No distant highway noise, no human voices. Just the occasional crack of a branch in the woods and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I had no cell service, but I didn't mind. That was part of the appeal. I climbed into my tent early, zipping myself into my sleeping bag. I was exhausted from the hike, but a strange restlessness settled over me. Somewhere in the distance, a single owl hooted. Then nothing. The silence stretched on too long. Not a single insect chirped. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I forced my eyes shut and eventually drifted off. Then I woke up. I had no idea what time it was, but something felt wrong. The air inside the tent was too cold. My sleeping bag felt different. My body felt off. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for my flashlight. The second I turned it on, my stomach dropped. I was in the wrong tent. I froze. The tent walls were a different color. The zipper was on the wrong side. My backpack was gone. This was not my tent. My breathing turned ragged. I fumbled with the zipper, yanked it down, and scrambled out. The night was pitch black, my fire long dead. The cold mountain air bit at my skin as I turned my flashlight toward the clearing. My tent, my real tent, was still there, 20 feet away, still zipped up, still exactly where I had pitched it. I spun around, my light sweeping the trees. Nothing.
No footprints.
No sign that anyone had been here. I didn't understand. I had gone to sleep in my own tent. How the hell had I woken up in another one? I forced myself to move, crossing the clearing in hurried steps. My real tent stood untouched. I grabbed the zipper, yanked it open. My backpack, my gear, all inside. The sleeping bag was still laid out, as if I had never left. But I had. Somehow, I backed away, shining my light toward the mystery tent. It sat there, still and silent. My mind raced for a rational explanation. Had I sleepwalked? No, I had never done that before. Had someone moved me? If so, why? And how? Was I losing my mind? I needed to see inside that tent. My hand shook as I reached for the zipper. I hesitated. What if something was inside? I forced the thought away. If I didn't look, I would never sleep. With one deep breath, I yanked the zipper down and threw open the flap. It was empty.
No sleeping bag. No gear.
Just a hollow tent, completely bare inside. But then I noticed something else. The fabric was bone dry. The tent had never been used. No dirt, no leaves, no sign that anyone had ever slept in it. Then whose was it? I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. I scanned the forest, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me, but there was nothing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat outside, knife in hand, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. At the first sign of daylight, I packed up as fast as I could. But I hesitated when I got to the other tent. Something inside me screamed to leave it alone. But I couldn't. I grabbed a tent pole and knocked it over. Collapsed easily, just a normal, modern tent. But when I looked closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On one of the tent flaps, near the bottom, was a name written in marker. A name I recognized. My own. I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten. The ink was faded, like it had been written long ago, but it was undeniably my name. That was it. I was done. I shouldered my pack and hiked out, moving as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I made it back to my car in record time, throwing my gear in the trunk. The entire drive home, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know how I ended up in a different tent. And I sure as hell don't know why it had my name on it. But I do know one thing. I will never go back to that place again.